It can be a difficult thing to describe what it is like to finally experience something you have waited a lifetime to do. I mean, how do you take something you've spent countless hours thinking about, dreaming about, and then tell someone else what you felt when you were finally able to turn that dream into a reality? Sometimes, even once you have the reality tucked safely away in your memory, it can be hard for you yourself to know what impact it actually had on you. How you changed, grew, what the experience meant to you. Even now, when I look back on our trip to Bwindi Impenetrable Forest National Park, when I think about what it was like to stand face to face with something that seemed at least as much like a person as I am, and I start to contemplate the meaning of... Oh, wow. Sorry about that. What do you say we put off some bumbling philosophical reaching until at least the end of the video, and I just start off by telling you what happened, yeah? Okay, here's the story. After a year of COVID lockdown, Michelle and I decided to get out and check off one of our biggest travel bucket list items, visiting mountain gorillas in East Africa. So we booked a flight to Uganda, lucked into hiring an absolutely amazing human being named Amos for our driver. Shoot me a message if you're headed to Uganda and I can put you in touch with Amos. And we set off to come face to face with our much larger, much hairier cousins, the mountain gorillas. The ride into Bwindi was beautiful. The road twisted through the mountains, tea fields dotted the slopes outside the park and gave away to primary forest as we entered the park. We arrived at the visitor center and Amos got us signed into a group. We learned that the gorilla family that we would visit had a 2-week-old baby. And importantly, that family was not very deep into the forest and they would be easy to reach. And that seemed like a pretty good thing to us, given that the name of the place is Impenetrable Forest. A local NGO called Ride for a Woman put on a short cultural show, and then before we knew it, we were back in the van headed to the trailhead. And so now from the headquarters, it's maybe like a 30-minute drive to our trailhead where we're gonna head in. Michelle has been looking forward to seeing gorillas since she was a little girl, so she took a bit of extra time on the ride to make sure she looked presentable for the experience. At the trailhead, there's a small village. We gathered for yet another briefing, and young men from the village waited to see if any of the tourists walking into the forest might be willing to hire them as a porter. Now, Michelle and I don't usually hire porters on these kinds of outings, but the whole area around Bwindi is heavily dependent on tourism. A year of no tourists had meant a year of no income for far too many people. Michelle and I had decided that if we were going to travel in what was really still the era of COVID, we wanted to spend as much money as we could afford to spend in local economies. So each of us hired ourselves a porter. Each of us gave over our very small backpacks to our porter, and off we went. We climbed up, 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 past tea fields, past livestock, past the point of being able to breathe easily. Remember, it was COVID. We were more used to sitting on the couch watching more or less all of Netflix while eating an entire loaf of sourdough bread than we were to hiking in the mountains. But it was a pleasant hike. First, through the tea-covered slopes, and then we entered the forest. Okay. Here is where it really first starts to get difficult for me to describe what this experience meant to me. As a boy, I grew up watching wildlife shows on TV with my family. This was before shows like the BBC's Planet Earth series popularized fantastic cinematography and a completely absent filming crew. No, these were the days where a middle-aged British guy stood squarely in the middle of the frame, romping through some far-flung habitat so he could hide behind a pebble and observe some kind of creature. And I know this is problematic now, but at the time, as a boy watching this, I wanted to be that British man I wanted to face down the elephants. I wanted to hide from the lions. I wanted to make friends with the gorillas. And so that young boy inside me thrilled to step out of the bright, open slopes of the tea fields and into the dense jungle. Before we even had a hint of the gorillas, I felt like I was living a dream. I felt fortunate to be in that forest, the forest where, even though we were only a few short minutes from cultivated tea fields and all the people who spent their days picking and collecting those leaves, it felt like this was the same forest that would have existed 1,000 years ago, or 1,000 years ago. It was a special place, and I felt fortunate to be standing there. It didn't take us long to come near the gorillas, maybe 45 minutes from the trailhead or so. We gathered together for, you guessed it, one more briefing. But this briefing was a bit different. The guides impressed upon us the need to remain quiet, to not make any sudden movements. And while the guides didn't come right out and explicitly tell us that the only thing that was going to keep the silverback from pounding any or all of us into a puddle of goo was that he didn't think there was any need to. And I think we all understood that. Note to self, don't annoy the ginormous alpha male. Got it. So I suited up, Canon camera in my hands, GoPro recording from atop my head, and onwards we went. Up, up, up. The whole time we watched the gorillas, they made moving along the steep slopes covered with thick vegetation and, I might add, a wide variety of biting and stinging insects look super easy. For those of us who live in houses and mow our lawns so that we never have to deal with grass coming higher than the middle of our feet, and cut stairs into every non-flat surface we walk across on a regular basis, moving through the habitat of the mountain gorilla is hard work. Let's just say the aforementioned GoPro recording from atop my head captured an awful lot of heavy breathing punctuated with outright gasps for more oxygen. But nevertheless, up, up, up I went. And then, just like that, a guide pointed. I saw the little ones first, up in the trees. There they were. And I have to say, part of the thrill I always feel when I first see an animal, especially when I've had to shell out a pretty goodly sum of money for the experience, and let me tell you, mountain gorillas ain't cheap. The first thing I often feel is sheer relief. Yes, we saw them. I didn't drop all that coin just to fail. And I felt that here too. But then I got caught up in watching the little ones up in the trees. My favorite was this guy. He was clearly playing, and he was curious about us. The adult gorillas would totally ignore us the whole time. But this little one checked us out. He watched us, and you could see him wondering who we were. It was also quite a sight to see an adult up in the trees as well. There must simply be an amazing amount of power in those hands to pull that body up into the canopy. The mother with the 2-week-old baby was sitting in a nest at the bottom of the trees, and I tried to get a good picture of the baby. And I found it both frustrating and endearing that I never did get a good shot of the tiny one. Its mother kept it held tightly to her, so it was disappointing to never get a good image. But I also felt a kinship with that mother, keeping her baby so close it would have been impossible for any of us to do it harm even if we wanted to. I understand that. Before long, the family was on the move. They seemed to glide up an impossibly steep slope over impossibly dense vegetation and simply disappear through the edge of the forest. We followed, moving impossibly slowly and impossibly clumsily, grasping and digging and scratching our way up the slope. The family had moved out of the forest, and now they sat at the edge of the tea fields. They lounged in the sun, they munched on leaves, They grunted with pleasure. And as I sat on the ground, one even approached me and began eating the leaves right behind where I sat. At some signal only gorillas understand, the family, as one, got up and descended back down into the forest. Happily, the route they chose back down was not quite so impossible, and so we followed a little easier this time. Even with the guides there to cut back the vegetation and try to give us a better view, it was still an impenetrable forest. But at the end of our time with the family, I got to squat down in the jungle in front of the silverback and take some images that became my favorites of the whole trip. Look at those eyes. And this one shows what the trip was really like. That intelligent face and the impenetrable forest. We got to spend a bit more time watching the gorillas do their gorilla thing. And then it was time for us to turn and go home and leave them to the rest of their day. So in the end, what did this experience mean? The truth is, I still don't quite know. I've spent a lot of time with monkeys and apes. I have visited chimpanzees and orangutans, and both experiences were deeply wonderful. But there is something special about the gorillas. And I know this sounds cliche, but they have an intelligence in their eyes that it doesn't come across just right in pictures and videos. Being with those gorillas, you can see that they are thinking and feeling just like we do. That they're bored, they're happy, they're hungry, they're content, they're interested, and they are often overtly disinterested. The line between person and animal became distinctly blurred to me in the hour that I spent with the mountain gorillas of Bwindi. I often say that I travel so that I can feel like a part of our world, so that I feel a connection, and it's most often a connection to the human race that I'm seeking. But being with those gorillas gave me a connection to something broader than I have ever experienced before, in a way that I didn't even know I was looking for. Because of my experience with the mountain gorillas of Bwindi, the world that I feel plugged into became so much larger than I had ever even dreamed of in my philosophy.